Hey guys, it's Osby
and Zac
with RetroMoose.
So we finally reached 10 reviews, and so we decided for this particular video, we were going to do things a little bit differently.
Today we're going to look at something that's highly regarded as one of the greatest RPGs of all time.
A game also considered by many to be a combination of a brand new puppy, God itself's blessing, and a slice of ice cream cake for RPGs.
But there's also a lot of stigma towards the game too,
aka the Dane Cook backlash effect.
Because of its release date, how it's aged over the years, and basically the overall experience the user gets from playing it.
So get ready to rain down those boos and those angry YouTube comments.
Let's talk about Final Fantasy VII. Now, to be fair, I want you to know that I am a little biased towards Final Fantasy VII.
And I'm a lot biased towards Final Fantasy VII.
I grew up with it.
As did I.
The first system I got was the Sega Genesis.
Shout out to Dr. Robotnik's Beam Machine!
Quickly followed by the PlayStation 1, with this being the first game that I ever owned.
Holy shit. I remember my PlayStation 1 came with 2 demo discs. One was for Bushido Blade, and the other one was Final Fantasy VII, and when I popped that in, it blew my f***ing mind.
Naturally, this was also the first RPG that I ever played.
The same goes for me.
You know, as a 9-10-year-old kid playing Final Fantasy VII, you can imagine what kind of experience I had.
And just to cover our bases, for anybody who may be watching going, what do these two chumps know about Final Fantasy VII? Well, prepare your anus, punk. This time for a merchandise montage.
Final Fantasy VII introduced me to a lot of different aspects of the RPG world. You know, grinding.
The only thing worse than QuickTime events.
Leveling up.
Thank you, Game Shark.
Looking for gear.
4 strength, 4 stam leather belt.
Talking to everybody in every town.
F you, Simon's Quest.
You know, it also introduced an in-depth look at storytelling, the good, the bad,
the hits, the misses,
the protagonist, the antagonist,
how terrifying a fandom can be,
plot twists, such an early age. It did a lot for me.
At that point, the biggest plot twist that I had experienced in a video game was that asshole Toad telling me that the princess was in another castle.
Here at RetroMoose, we can honestly say Final Fantasy VII is the greatest RPG of all time.
Final Fantasy VII is the greatest RPG of all time.
But is it really?
Wait, what?
Why do we think it's the greatest?
Uh-oh.
Why does anyone think it's the greatest?
Oh god, the internet's gonna hate us.
The only way we can really talk about this, we can't just have a nostalgic fanboy review.
Why not? Everybody else does.
And we can't have a literal review of the game.
Because Wikipedia exists now.
We kind of have to have both to be able to actually find the answer to that. So we're going to start with a nostalgic review. We're going to look back at things that we really enjoyed about the game, things that really pulled us in, and things that really made Final Fantasy VII great for us.
Then we'll possibly pause for snack time and a nap.
And then we're going to take off the nostalgic shades,
put on our big boy pants,
and look at it from a literal standpoint. Playing the game again after several years, how does it hold up? Is it really everything that we bargained for? Is it really everything that we're making it out to be? What are some of the flaws with the games? What's some of the plot holes, etc., stuff like that.
Basically, we're looking to rain on the parade of an entire generation of gamers.
So let's dive right into Final Fantasy VII.
AKA the RetroMoose Suicide Mission. Now, just to give you a little bit of backstory, Final Fantasy VII was developed and released by Squaresoft in 1997. It was the first in the famous series to use 3D computer graphics. It's the best-selling game of the franchise and of its time, and is a cornerstone of gaming history.
From a nostalgic standpoint, why is Final Fantasy VII so influential on our perception of RPGs?
Well, my thought is the old adage that history is written by the winners. So Final Fantasy VII comes out, and it blows away the competition. It's the greatest selling RPG of its day. So therefore, it becomes the poster child of what every other JRPG should do on a strictly monetary level. How do we replicate what they've done and their success for our game? That's why it's so influential. Just comes down to the dollars. The
first thing I think of is all these major Final Fantasy VII fanboys grew up with it. You had your fanboys that started with Chrono Trigger, you had your fanboys that started with Final Fantasy IV, Final Fantasy VI, or 2 and 3 depending on which part of the world you lived in. But the people that grew up with Final Fantasy VII, they didn't get that sprite-based RPG first-hand experience. They got the polygonal pointy bits experience of a fantastic 3D world in a time when 3D video games was new.
And just as a comparison piece here, for any of those darn kids today who point and laugh at the graphics of Final Fantasy VII, let's go ahead and look at other games that were trying to push the 3D element at that same time. Yeah, wow, really cutting edge. So yeah, Final Fantasy VII didn't get dealt the best hand, but you know what? It did the best with what it had. Alright, so enough of the details and the backstory, let's just gush about this thing already.
And everybody has a favorite character and a least favorite character. Honestly, my favorite character in the game is probably Barret, because Barret was badass.
Barret's totally the best. It's not even a question.
Now, Barret didn't get as much love as some of the other characters did throughout the game and the story progression and the character development. He did get some flashbacks, but my biggest thing with Barret was he had a machine gun on his arm. I mean, who does that?
Tetsura Nomura, apparently?
You walk in a room and you're like, oh hey, that's fantastic. I absolutely love Barret.
My favorite character, on the other hand, was the bonus character of Vincent Valentine. Now, true, his character arc was a little bit emo and a little whiny at times, but I mean, this villain turned anti-hero had the absolute greatest super moves of anyone in a game ever. Because instead of a super big hit or a really cool weapon attack, this motherfucker turned into a horror trope. A weird hell beast, a Frankenstein monster, Jason Voorhees, and finally a straight up demon from hell itself. Never before in a video game have I had a neutral good character turn into the killer from Crystal Lake to go fucking destroy some bad guys.
My least favorite character in the game has to be Yuffie. Yuffie just steals everything. I mean, yes, she's got the cool throw ability that you probably will never use in the game, but she steals everything. Now, her side quest to get her is a lot of fun. I didn't really enjoy trying to level her up, and I also didn't really enjoy chasing her around in the forest trying to actually capture her, but when you actually go back to her hometown, that was a lot of fun.
Ooh, least favorite character for me? Probably Sid, I guess? I mean, he plays an important role in the story. I mean, he pilots all your ships, he moves stuff along, but by the time he joins your party, you're up to your asshole and playable character, so his fighting style just never really interested me, so I very rarely ever used him.
Other great experiences with Final Fantasy VII that I have looking back was grinding and how it felt to actually be able to beat something that just kept whipping your ass over and over and over. For example, a very vivid memory that I have is getting spanked repeatedly by the Midgar Zolom because I didn't think to just go around it with the Chocobo. But when I was able to come back later in the game and finally just beat the shit out of it, oh, it was fantastic.
I remember that exact same enemy, and quite frankly, it scared the fuck out of me. Because for the first time in a video game, I was coming across something that I couldn't beat, and it wasn't just because of my horrible lack of gaming skill. I was simply outclassed by this behemoth. And instead of throwing my controller down and never playing it again, the game whispered to me, "It's okay, you'll come back to this beast stronger in a few hours, and you'll wreck this thing, shit! You're the man! You're the man!" Aw, gee, Final Fantasy VII, thanks, but what do I do about this giant snake in the meantime?
Final Fantasy VII will always hold a special spot in our hearts and minds because it introduced us to the JRPG. Or at least those of us that grew up with it, like I said before. It made us think, it made us look to grind, it made us focus on characters. It told a story.
Emphasis on story. Nowadays, if your game doesn't have at least a 100-hour story tied to it, it gets laughed off the shelf. You better throw all your money at the multiplayer, or the single-player campaign better be the goddamn greatest story ever told, or nobody's buying it. But back in 1997, that wasn't the case. You know another noteworthy game that came out at the same time as Final Fantasy VII? Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back. And yes, that's an awesome game in its own right. But is it a full, engrossing world with larger-than-life obstacles and a fully developed cinematic story? No, you can just jump on stuff. Yeah, jumping is cool. And just a brief aside, another strength to Final Fantasy VII is its soundtrack. This was the Final Fantasy on PlayStation, so the composers for music had more than a 16-bit cartridge to work with. And lucky for us, Nobu Uematsu is a genius. The PS1 sound chip makes the track sound very MIDI-ish, but pay attention to the composition of the pieces. It's brilliant. I'm dead serious though. Check it top to bottom. That entire soundtrack is amazing.
When I think back to Final Fantasy VII from a nostalgic standpoint, I only think of good things. The problem with that is that you don't remember the bad things. So let's take off the nostalgic shades and let's look at Final Fantasy VII from a literal standpoint. And let's look at how it actually aged. The graphics in Final Fantasy VII are very inconsistent. Now there are the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good being some of the renderings that you have late game that show full body characters that don't look bad at all for the time. The bad being the graphical downgrade of those characters that you see during the battle sequence. The ugly being the way the game looks and the way the characters look as you run around in towns and on the world map. The overworld view of your character looks nothing like your battle character, which looks nothing like some of the renderings that you see later in the game. It's so inconsistent, it's mind-boggling, and it's frustrating as hell.
Not necessarily a criticism of the game, but just something really weird of note. There's an alarming amount of references to the number 7 in Final Fantasy VII. And I'm not just talking about like, it's the 7th game in the series, or it came out in 1997. I'm talking like Illuminati conspiracy theory levels of references to the number 7. Avalanche, the rebel group, secretly resides in the town of Sector 7. Tifa's bar is called 7th Heaven. Shinra headquarters has 70 floors. Books in the Shinra Mansion Library form VII. The Red Plain in Costa del Sol has VII painted on the side of it. Gold Saucer has 7 areas for attraction. Ancient Forest has 7 treasures. Ares and her mother were held captive by Hojo for 7 years. Was Sephiroth's dick 7 inches long? Like, what is going on here? This is so weird!
Another thing that bothers people a lot about Final Fantasy VII are a couple of the broken gameplay mechanics. For example, the W item materia. Yes, it's great to use 2 items in one turn, but if you know anything about the W item glitch, you can manipulate the game to mass produce any consumable item that you can use during a battle and end up with 99 of everything. It's absurd. Another broken mechanic in the game is the magic stat defense for every piece of equipment, because it just doesn't work. If you equip items because you think, oh, it's got great magic defense, nope, Final Fantasy VII, it doesn't work. Broken mechanic, waste of time. From a plot standpoint, Final Fantasy VII, a literal review, it has both good and bad elements. Some of the good elements being, it's a very good story. I mean, that's the main thing that Final Fantasy VII has going for it, is it's a very engaging story. But there's some pretty epic plot holes in it. For example, Ares dies because Sephiroth stabs her. Why the f*** did Cloud not use a damn Phoenix Down?
Phoenix Downs, keep in mind, are the items that the game has that you can use to revive a teammate who has fallen in battle. And yet, Ares gets stabbed and nobody thinks to use one to revive her. Now look, if you're building an RPG and you have the Phoenix Down MacGuffin in your item inventory, then if you're going to plan to kill off a character in your game within the story, that death better be so over the top that there is no hope of reviving that character back. So instead of getting a little prick in the back, instead she should have gotten blown up, the remnant should have been shot into the sun, and then the sun should have been exploded, so that there is no doubt that no amount of Phoenix Downs is going to save her.
Another major plot point is Cloud just not telling the truth for most of the game. The version of himself that he remembers was actually Zac, one of his friends and soldier. Cloud lies to everybody.
No, genuinely though, Cloud is lying constantly in this game. Like, halfway through the story, every time Cloud speaks up, the rest of the team should just shut him down because he's full of lies.
Another thing that really gets me about the plot is really one of the gameplay battle mechanics. When you fight Sephiroth at the end of the game, he uses a move where he pulls down the meteor and it destroys every planet in the solar system, finally hitting Earth. Now that was really cool to see, but if he actually destroyed Earth, the game should be over.
That move did jump the shark. I mean, this is a game we're talking about where you can call upon a mythical god to come down on speed dial and just beat the crap out of things you don't feel like fighting. You can also call on the ghosts of King Arthur and all his knights to take up 15 minutes of your time to do a super move. But just smashing the whole universe together for a move that you can just keep spamming as a boss, jump the shark.
So not only did he destroy the solar system and the planets and everything once, but he does it over and over and over until you actually kill him. Because that's totally legit, and that should happen with Final Fantasy VII game logic. Final Fantasy VII focused on a lot of different themes. First of all, one of the themes being death. A lot of people die in Final Fantasy VII, including main characters. Another theme being save the planet. The live stream, the planet's dying.
Yeah, keep in mind in the mid-90s, there was a lot of propaganda for children about the dangers of pollution. pretty much everything in pop culture was some sort of shade of Ferngully.
That's cool. I enjoyed it. It seemed a tad bit much at some points in the game, and almost a little pushy. Another theme of the game that almost ruined my childhood and probably ruined countless other people's childhoods was the entire build-up going into and afterwards for the Honeybee Inn.
Yeah, what the hell was going on with that?
Now, the Honeybee Inn, it's basically a brothel.
Game for kids!
And there's several things that happen in it that are kind of disturbing. For example, the insinuated BDSM.
Game for kids!
Scene where a bunch of muscular men in Speedos jump into the tub with Cloud.
Game for kids!
Or the fact that Cloud cross-dresses and tries to seduce a man that kidnapped Ares by sexually teasing him via words.
Yeah, cross-dressing and flirting, because apparently the major influences of Final Fantasy VII were Blade Runner, Berserk, and Tu Wong Fu, thanks for everything, f***ing Julie Newmar.
As a final verdict, would we suggest that anyone else play Final Fantasy VII? Sure. If you can look past the graphical inconsistencies and the broken game mechanics and some major plot holes, it's a great experience.
Osby, if you wouldn't mind, before we wrap this whole thing up, I'd like to take a moment to do something that I feel I do best, and that is take a video game and make an insane, seemingly nonsensical comparison to a major motion picture. You see, here at RetroMoose, we're not here to tell you that Final Fantasy VII is better than your favorite video game. We're not here saying that Final Fantasy VII is perfect and flawless. What we're trying to say is, do you know why Citizen Kane is considered to be the greatest film of all time? It's not because it's more interesting or prettier than every other film ever made. Having Orson Welles yelling, "I'm important, goddammit!" for 2 hours isn't cooler than Darth Vader or Jaws or whatever movie you like best. But Citizen Kane did more for how films are made, more than any other film. They invented like 15 different techniques, new camera angles, lighting design. Kane became the benchmark that all future films could learn from. This exact same idea applies to Final Fantasy VII. There may be games out there that have better graphics, or cooler characters, or a less convoluted story, but Final Fantasy VII changed how we viewed games from PlayStation 1 onward. And for better or for worse, it was in more homes than any other RPG before it, more kids got exposed to it, and as such, the gaming culture changed. Games about journeys, games that became more of a cinematic experience, games that weren't just bullshit to keep children quiet so their parents could drink in peace. It was a whole new way of looking at gaming, and for that it is always going to be historically relevant, and it is a cornerstone for gaming as we know it today.
Now, if you are an actual RPG fan, you'll fit right in with Final Fantasy VII, and if you're just an average gamer who doesn't play very much, you might have some problems. But yes, we would still suggest it.
So yes, we love Final Fantasy VII. And if you don't, that's okay. But f*** you.
Now, is it the greatest RPG ever made? Well, we'll leave that one up to you. Thanks for watching RetroMoose. For more information on retro gaming, check us out at www.retromoose.com.